Hello. All right, this is my presentation on my topic paper, which is titled Attention. Can students control their attention in the classroom? Why I chose this topic. This is something that I see every day in the classroom. It's a daily struggle for my students every year, for my elementary students. I can imagine that if I was doing my college students in person, that this would also be a struggle for them. I have also personally seen the struggle myself with being a student again. I like to call it mom brain or things like that. But keeping your attention on an assignment or a 20-page article or things like that can be difficult without having your attention going somewhere else while you're doing that. So this is why this topic interests me to write it on, my paper on. Why important in the classroom? Well, this is something that teachers want in their classroom. They want to have their students' attention. It is something that is believed that if you have your attention, then the chance of them retaining the content that you're teaching them is greater. So it is definitely something that it is top priority for teachers wanting. If paying attention, then are they learning? Well, a common saying is pay attention, please. I know I said it myself over years. I even find myself saying it sometimes probably daily. You know, pay attention or please put this down so I can have your attention. It's probably a word that we say more as teachers than we realize we're doing. Why that is a common thing we say interested me. Are we saying it because we don't think they're learning unless they're paying attention to us? Or are we saying it just because we want them to be looking at us while we're talking to them? All things that I wanted to try and dive into looking at. I put a quote on here from Schnuck, and sustained attention is critical for learning. And it was just something that stuck out to me, which is why, again, I like this topic, was because of the word attention and the word critical in this. Because, you know, is it critical? Do we have to have their attention for them to be learning what we're teaching them? And that is something that I wanted to look more into. Movement. So something I had read about in the articles I read was, can the students pay attention while they're moving? We have a lot of people that are a lot of kids or people that can't necessarily sit still. I mean, I know when I'm in class, I might be moving around, or maybe I find myself sitting with my shoulders back and I'll fix and adjust my shoulders, or, you know, the students move and put a leg under under themselves to prop themselves up, or they shift around, or maybe you just might have a student that moves around a lot. So that is something that is known as not having their attention if they're moving. So that is a very common assumption, is that if the kids are moving around, they're not listening. I believe every kid is different. I've had kids that can rock back and forth. I even have wobble chairs in my classroom. I at one point had a bouncy ball chair, but it got popped twice. So I don't have that one in my room anymore. But I have wobble chairs where some students, it helped them to be moving. I also have bouncy bound cords, which basically is a glorified, really thick rubber band from one pole to another on the student's desk. And they can quietly move their foot back and forth without disrupting the room. And I do think for some children it works. For some I don't. I think it's too much of a distraction, and you can't hear, they can't hear the teacher. I've had some students that I've had to tell them, if the bouncy band is more of a distraction than it is helpful, we can take yours off of your desk. So things like that, because some kids just, it doesn't work for them. Every kid is different. So here's my example from my experience, things I use in my classroom already, things I found I liked or didn't like. And like I said, you can't just assume if it works for one kid. I found that it's going to automatically work for another kid because everyone's different. Engagement. Most worry that if they're moving, they're not paying attention. But I don't necessarily agree with that. I think kids can be engaged in moving around and be hearing you or hearing their group members. I like when we do group work in my classroom to tell them to push their chair actually in and to stand up. Because I find that if they're working with a group and they're not moving around, they're not usually interacting with our group very much. I don't know if it's like a safe spot sitting in their seat or what, but I find that if they stand up, push their chair in, they're going to get interactive with their group much more than if they all sit there. Or even if they just lean forward and kind of prop themselves up on their knees to be inside of their group a little bit more. So some movement can be helpful. Off task. Here is another quote that I decided to put in here that I really liked. Prior research examining the frequency with which students engage in off-task behavior have estimated that children spend between 25% and 50% of their time off-task in regular education classrooms. So we have a lot of time where we're considering it off-task. So possibly staring at the wall or zoning out or watching someone else. There's always a lot of people watching in classrooms, just like there is restaurants and other places like that. But with classroom, teachers have expectations of what they want done in a classroom, especially if you have your students all day, or maybe an extended class, 3 or 4 hours, and you have certain things you want to get done during that class day. And when the students aren't getting that way and you feel that they're only getting a certain percent, you've got this off-task time. Distractions and engagement. Distractions, I think, are a big part of why we're off task. Like I was saying before, maybe someone walks in the room, distracts them, and it's hard for them to get back until someone possibly grabs their attention and gets it back on what they're working on, back on task, I should say. Engagement. I think engagement really helps with not having off-task time, because you're going to have a lot of distractions, but the more involved they are, the more less likely they are to pay attention to somebody coming into the room. So if I am just at my seat working by myself and someone walks in the room loudly, I might look over to what they're doing. But if I'm working on something and I'm fully engaged in it, maybe it's by myself, maybe it's with a partner, then I'm less likely going to be hearing the loud person that comes inside the room and look over their way because I'm fully engaged in what I'm doing. So engaging activities will help you through the distractions, and that will help be off task less. And then the teachers won't have to ask for the students' attention to come back as often or at all. Length. This was definitely something that was mentioned throughout reading my journal articles, and whether the students have a certain amount of time. What's a good amount of time to have their attention? Is it 2 minutes? Is it 5 minutes, 15, 30? Is it okay to have their attention for a straight hour without any breaks? And at what age? The length of time for attention is very different for a kindergartner or an 8th grader or a freshman in college. Those are going to be very different things. So, and hold on a second. There we go. Something that helps with that length of time is brain breaks and engagement. So giving them breaks to refocus, having them stand up, stretch, sit back down. And also, again, coming back to that word that now I've said 3 times, engagement, having them engage. If they're engaged in something, you're going to probably keep their attention a lot longer than you would than if they're just doing a math worksheet with 50 questions on it. That would be a tough one for any student to stick with through 50 questions. But if you were doing a puzzle or a escape room puzzle and they had 50 questions into it, you're kind of a better chance of keeping the students' attention for those 50 questions because that activity will be very engaging. Okay. Moving on to school practices. So there are a lot out there. There are a lot of school practices out there that can be tried. I recommend trying all sorts of things with different groups because you're going to have different type of groups. So don't assume that what worked with one class will work with the next. So subject placement is one thing. And we do this at the school I work at. Everybody needs to have math and reading in the morning before lunch because we tend to not have their attention as well in the afternoon. When they come in from recess, they're usually hot, they're tired at this point. And then having them for something like math versus maybe a fun video in science, you're probably got a better chance of getting their math attention in the morning. But like I said, every group is different. So this is one possible school practice. Another one is attention grabbing cues. So such as flipping a light switch on and off, or some type of clap pattern. So I clap twice and then the kids clap back 3 times. Something that whenever they hear my clap, then they respond, and it grabs their attention in such a small way that you don't have to stop or say anything or point out a couple kids, or it's just something that everyone will know. They get 3 claps and then they know because you've told them at the beginning of the year that, hey, this is our time to get back on what we were doing, or whatever the teacher considers us to be needing to be doing right then, to be on task. So those are things that can be done to practice in the classroom without having to move heaven and earth to get your students' attention. Technology. I have heard a lot about this, and I was very happy to find an article that focused in on it. Does technology affect your students' attention? And there were a lot of positive and negatives for both. So something that would be a negative is that students want instant gratification all the time. They want games that are fun and exciting. And if you hand them a boring worksheet, it's kind of like, I could be on this app that has all sorts of pictures going everywhere really quickly. So they seem to be disappointed with the simple things sometimes if it is not as eye-catching. And that seems to be a negative. They seem to not want to do anything else but the really quick technology that they could, that they know that there is now. Their attention span, I remember growing up, when you watched a 30-minute episode, you had 1, maybe 2 commercials. And I know because that was your time, you didn't have DVR, so that was your time to go to the bathroom, maybe sneak a chore in, but that was your only time. But now if you were to watch a 30-minute episode, you might have 6 commercial breaks. And now if you play an app on your iPad, you might have a ad pop up every 4 minutes. And the kids' attention spans for these things, some say that it's creating a shorter attention span. So I could elaborate on some of this a lot more, but I'm going to try not to make this video super long. On the positive, though, of instant gratification, this can be a positive thing. Things like one online learning provider I like to use is IXL. So the kids can do a math problem, put the answer in, and click enter, and it tells them right away if they've got it right. And if they get it wrong, it tells them at the bottom why they got it wrong. And then it gives them another one. So when you've got 20 kids in your room, you can teach a math lesson, but then have them practice it, and you don't have to walk around and check 20 problems and tell them if they're correct. Where when I started teaching, that's what I had to do. And now, 15 years in, I don't have to do that constantly anymore. We have things like technology that can, give them immediate feedback and help them right away to see if they're learning it. Also, again, this is a positive with the graphics and sounds. It is, kids like it. Kids like to be learning online because they have such vivid graphics and wonderful sounds and things like that. So it can be a positive and it can be very negative as well. It's kind of a happy medium. I wouldn't change it for anything. I wouldn't go back and get rid of the technology. I just think we have to consider how technology might affect our students' attention and do both. Do things with technology and do things without technology, and consider both sides of it, so that they're not expecting things to be grabbing their attention nonstop. And maybe be okay with a teacher talking to you instead of a computer screen talking to you all the time. And then it might help them. And lastly, associated learning problems. So there's a lot of associated things out there that go along with this. Things like ADHD, that's one example of hyperactivity and movement that can harm your attention span in a student. Or possibly a teacher might say to a parent, they're having trouble paying attention in class, they can't sit the whole lesson, there's a lot of movement, they seem very hyper, and things like that. So this is one that commonly gets put with attention spans. As not being able to pay attention. Wow, this may be true for some. That does not mean just because you can't get their attention in class, it doesn't mean that they have ADHD. So that is one learning problem that can be associated with this. Some possible interventions, and again, this is just like practices. There's a lot of interventions out there. One is self-monitoring, having the students be aware whether you've got a clapping thing or possibly a buzzer that goes off, like a very quiet buzzer, something that just grabs their attention for a second, like every 5 minutes. And then they know that's, oh, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be working. So possibly those people you don't have attention for, they can get back on task without the teacher having to go to the front of the room and make it more of a distraction. I think this self-monitoring way would be a less distraction, I believe. Good behavior game was something I read about in one of the journal studies. It was very interesting, whereas the class would be possibly split in half and you've got one side versus the other. And if someone's off task, the whole group would lose a point or lose something. Or possibly the group that was on task could gain a point. You wouldn't have to necessarily take away. And of course, kids are competitive. Adults are competitive. This is to be something that would try, it would really force them to try to pay attention because they wouldn't want to let their group down. And they also would want to win. And then I have a quote here. A fifth grade teacher was able to cover 25% more material after the good behavior game was introduced. So they found that because the kids were using this good behavior game, that the students were on task more and they were able to cover 25% more material after this game was introduced because the students were working so efficiently. In conclusion, I learned a lot from doing this topic. I got to reaffirm some of the things that I already knew, and I got to learn a lot of things I did not know and look at it from more of a research perspective, looking into my topic. So I got to read what other research people have done on it. I wasn't researching myself, but I was getting to learn about what else has been done out there and hear more elaborate information about it and see a more thorough side of it, see data, see numbers, see what other teachers have seen in their room, hear feedback about attention and attention spans in the classroom and what kids are capable of. And I think this is something that will be important for all teachers to look into at some point, especially if you teach any age or grade level where you think that students might struggle with attention spans. And it does pertain a lot to elementary students because we're with students for a lot longer. Whereas in college, you might not have them for one setting for so long. You might have a 3-hour class at the longest. Whereas elementary, you have them for 7 or 8 hours a day, depending on how long your school day is. And having your attention, students' attention is important, but it looks different for every student. And it's good for teachers to know that so that they can help their students and see what works for them and not maybe pressure them to be a certain way or conform a certain way like everybody else. So I really enjoyed learning about my topic, and that is it.